to as a role model. And in answer to your question, 77 Brigade is a very new concept for us in the British Army. When we were looking at, in 2014, 2015, the concept of how we operate and how we tackle some of the new threats and issues that we see within the information space, the various elements of the British Army that existed at the time, including Media Operations Group, which I was then a part of and deployed as a part of in 2015, were brought together within a structure known as the Security Assistance Group. Thereafter, the conceptual analysis took place of just what the British Army needed and what the capability was needed to tackle some of those emerging threats within the information environment. So, as a part of this journey, the British Army and Brigadier Aitken at the time, who was brigade commander, very much looked at lessons that could be learnt from our history, and he turned to Indian Army history during the World War II period for a reason, because one of the key things that came across in that analysis was the levels of success, the high professionalism, and the innovation that took place within the Indian Army at the time, and certainly within Burma, where we see war being fought with limited resources. Of course, during World War II, much focus is on other theatres of war, but Burma isn't as prevalent in people's research or academic research in particular. So from there, a concept emerged of just what was it about the Chindits that enabled them to beat the Japanese, who were seen at the time as undefeatable. And so the study into long-range penetration group and what they achieved brought back these lessons, and the Brigadier and the Army at the time very much embraced this idea of bringing the concept and bringing the understanding from 77 Brigade of the Indian Army back into the UK to look at how we can frame new problems from the lessons of the past.
Right, great. Jane Shadegil, sir, I've not left you out. Sorry, I left you out now, but I'm just trying to balance it all out. But you being a cavalry officer, your father was a very distinguished cavalry officer also. The Armoured Corps played a very important role in the two wars. But the Armoured Corps, like the infantry, which the Honourable Chief Minister belongs to, and I've also had the privilege of serving with the infantry, has inherited a number of traditions which really make it function in a particular way, which is perhaps the most tried and trusted system anywhere in the world. And one of the things that the older armoured regiments at least have diligently followed, including yours, Dick and Horse, is the class and caste composition of the squadrons. To what extent was it influenced by the British who helped set up those regiments originally, and to what extent are some of those traditions held very deeply dear in your and other regiments, Skinner's Horse, Hodson's Horse, 2nd Lancers, Sindh Horse, including Sindh Horse keeping the bottom button of the waistcoat open in memory of the Prince of Wales's visit. So can you elaborate on that?
Well, the first question that you asked was, what was left to us? Well, what was left to us was a simple thing that's actually been in the army forever. And in the Armoured Corps, particularly in tanks, you very quickly learn that you were one person of the crew. And so you did everything that your role within the tank required you to do. You were not superior, and in many ways you were inferior to the kind of work that the rest of the crew could put in. You were a unit, you were a team. And there's another thing that influenced the behavior of the cavalry at large, because they're known to have panache, elan, they dress flashily, red scarves, crimson scarves, gold scarves. But that's for a reason. They travel in a protected environment, and therefore they have to show on the battlefield that they can be aggressive. And I think that spirit, they have to justify the fact that they're wearing those flashy scarves and not sulk somewhere behind, but actually lead. What was left to us as far as the so-called class system is concerned? Yes, there were a time where there was a heavy recruitment of the Pathans. But after the First World War, that decreased, and you saw the rise of the Punjabis within the First World War. But the British felt it politic to ensure that you didn't have one caste in one battalion altogether. There were, of course, some battalions that were all class, but you invariably had a company or two of a different class. In my own regiment, the Deccan Horse, we have the Sikhs, we have the Jats, and we have the Dogras. I think it's a great mix, because each one competes with the other, and all for the efficiency and effectiveness of the regiment. And I might say, in my regiment, the Dogras are known as the Pyar Squadron, where with just a bit of love and affection, you can get them to do anything. The Jats are known as the Larch Squadron. You have to put that staff down, and once they've seen the staff down, they'll do anything for you. The Sikh Squadron is known as the Ishara Squadron, because they will function just on an indication of what you want to do. But at the same time, you've got to ensure that you've got a strong pair of reins to hold them back. And so there's a lot left to us, and a lot that we recognized of what we should be. And we've taken it forward. We've had some knocks, we've had some successes. But all in all, I think we've done one better.
I'd agree. Brigadier Gavin, sir, I'd like to ask you, I visited Sandhurst about 35 years ago, but I remember seeing an Indian Army corridor. The chapel, of course, at Sandhurst has names of Indians etched there. Our own military academy has that connect also. To what extent, and you're a tank man, to what extent, and there are two questions for you. One is that you draw upon that Indian experience even now when you go out into operations, and your army has been out in operations quite a bit since 9/11. I know there is an infantry regiment of your army which has brass buttons with the tiger and Hindustan written below that. My good friend Richard Holmes of Lucy showed me that button. So what is that Hindustan connection? Is that still there, or is it just there in emblems? And to what extent do you go back as a tank man to draw on lessons that you learned as regiments in battle with Indian troops, and how you expected your man under your command to perform?
They're sort of big questions of the universe, which I'll try and answer in about 2 minutes. But just where you started, I think it's worth mentioning that you started at Sandhurst, and you mentioned the Indian Army Memorial Room, and it's worth letting you know that in September this year we reopened the Indian Army Memorial Room, because for a long time it hadn't been looked after as well as it might. It is the preeminent hosting room at Sandhurst. Whenever dignitaries and delegations come to Sandhurst, they're always hosted in the Indian Army Memorial Room. And through collaboration between three organisations, the National Army Museum in the UK, USI in India, and the British High Commission, we have formed a memorandum of understanding to keep the heritage of the British Indian heritage alive. but we've just reopened the Indian Army Memorial Room, and it's had a very, very expensive renovation. The stained glass windows have been repaired. There's some fantastic displays, medals, paintings, and now every time foreign delegations come to Sandhurst, they'll be taken into the Indian Army Memorial Room, which I think is emblematic of the fact that the engineering of the British Army is still heavily dependent on its Indian heritage. Some of you will have seen Brigadier Alan Manson on these panels over the last 2 days. He talks about his book, The Making of the British Army, in which he doesn't go chronologically through the history. What he does is he tries to identify those major muscle movements, those defining moments in the history of the British Army that made it what it is now. And one of the aspects that he says is the relationship with India was a formative relationship in the way that the British Army developed in the 19th and in the early 20th century. So I think it is completely wired in to the British Army, its Indian heritage. If you look at Sandhurst, the book that we're all given at Sandhurst when we join is a book called Serve to Lead. And that in itself, if you like, is derived very heavily from the lessons that Slim brought out of the 14th Army and Burma, in a way in which a British officer and an Indian officer very seldom talk about their careers and very frequently use the word service when they describe their time in uniformed service. And that's a common thing between us, and the bond, I think, part of the bond for that is the experience of the Second World War, if not the First World War as well.
Great.
And I would also just like to add on that one that we have talked a little bit about the negligence in reflecting on Infar and Kohima sufficiently. But if you Google it, you will see that in very recently, the British public was asked to vote for which it was the most important British battle in history, and Infar Kohima came out as top. The British public voted Infar Kohima as the most significant British battle of all time. So I think those examples give you a sense of just how important the Indian heritage is to the British Army now.
Yes, I'm aware. I've been to both the war cemeteries in Imphal and Kohima, and of course, Imphal is not quoted that often, though there is something inscribed on the memorial there, which says their memory liveth forever. But it's Kohima where it was said, when you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow, we gave our today. And I'd like to by that introduce Ms. Stewart. You being a historian about tank warfare, in some ways, the use of tanks and armored vehicles, though they moved in from very narrow roads and the armored force could not exploit the advantage of maneuver that open spaces would give them, but on these hilly roads coming from Dimapur to Kohima and Imphal, they made a difference. At the same time, tanks made a huge difference in North Africa. I'm talking about World War II. World War I was when they were introduced, as we know. What is it that you go back into your records to remind you that what worked for you on the Burma front while using tanks and not being able to exploit the one advantage they should normally have, that is the ability to maneuver?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I look at it in the training that was going on, the realisation that when the 7th Armoured Brigade was basically being sent to Singapore, it was you had General Auchinleck arriving in Rangoon on the early February 1942. He saw that the rice paddy fields were suitable for tanks to use. So he basically diverted 7th Armoured Brigade to Rangoon instead of Singapore. That helped the actual 17th Indian Division and Third Corps basically to withdraw out of Burma. So it's successfully used there. I think the really interesting thing is the development in 43. You start getting the Jungle Book, you start getting, obviously from 1941, you start getting the Indian cavalry being mechanised, and you start getting them trained. You start getting tanks coming over from, once you're getting the Mediterranean campaign finishing in Tunisia finishing in May 1943, you start seeing more tanks coming over to India and Burma. And what you start seeing is you start seeing more of the, basically building up the Indian tank brigades. You start getting up to 3 by 1944, and you're getting more of these units trained. So at Ranchi, they're being trained to actually start tactically deploying against the Japanese, and they come across, and they're using really a couple of tactics to defeat them. They come across these bunkers that the Japanese have. They start doing bunker busting. They start using the tanks and the infantry. They start training together, and they cooperate. So it's tank and infantry cooperation, much like the First World War, to destroy these fixed positions. And this is really important when you're going up, especially in Far Lima, up on those razor edges. You need to have the infantry there to protect you from these Japanese anti-tank squads coming towards you. And so it's very important to have that, basically that support there. And it's very interesting, the 3rd Carabiniers basically said that they preferred working with 9th Infantry Brigade because 9th Infantry Brigade wouldn't go into action without tanks. They knew how important the tanks were. They could give you direct fire support. What you see, so you see this one of tank and infantry support, and then once you cross the Irrawaddy, and you get into more of, you get into the, basically a less mountainous, much more open areas of that sort of the valleys by the side of the river, it becomes easier to deploy the tanks in a much more manoeuvre type of warfare. So they actually, if you look at the Mikitila, you can deploy 255 Brigade there, with the Royal Deccan Horse and probing corps coming in. You can deploy regiments of tanks there. So you're not, when you're looking at the Arakan and you're looking really in Infal, etc., you're more doing things by troops and squadrons. Down there, you are using many more tanks. So it's a split. So late 44, 45, you do get manoeuvre war coming down, but that's to do with the terrain and the fact they're able to push the Japanese back.
Yeah. And above all, in the last part of the assault, the tanks are with you. They provide the infantrymen the cover to get to the objective from direct enemy fire. But Honourable Chief Minister, sir, you've written about the Battle of Saragiri. You've written about the other actions of various units of the Indian Army. I have all your books, including the one on World War I. Which were the battles that you would look back and say were the defining battles in Indo-British military cooperation in those two great wars?
Saragiri was a different sort of a battle. It was 1897 and it was a post which was held by a platoon of 36 people. I'll go by the new names, 4th, 6th today. And it was a communication fortress between two forts, Lockhart and Gulistan. And this was along the line of communication to the Chaglu-Kotal Pass, from where the force was supposed to turn right and go right into the interior of tribal areas where they'd never been before. That is one point. But I want to go a bit further, because at that time there were 4 Sikh battalions. If you know, that the Sikh regiment only came into being in 1846 after the signing of the Sutlej Treaty. 10,000 Malwai soldiers had been removed and sent back to their villages. And at that time there were little rumblings in the villages, so people who had been used to some sort of life didn't want to come back home. And then the powers that be decided to raise 2 battalions. So one the regiment of Firozpur and one the regiment of Ludhiana. It was the first Sikh and the second Sikh, which is mine. And then, of course, first Sikh has now left us and gone to the mechanized infantry. But these were the 2 that were raised in 1846, 31st of July in 1846. And then we got the 3rd Sikh, later on Ratris raised it. And then the 4th one, which was the 4th Sikh, which was in 1884. That was raised as a police battalion earlier, then disbanded and made into a Sikh regiment later on. Now this is the 4th that did the Saragari operation, but it was not only them. 4th was holding that. 1st was holding the defense of Chitral. The 3rd was at Chakdara, where they won a Victoria Cross. And the 4th was on this line of communication, which I mentioned, to the Stradipur Pass. The other side of the pass was a brilliant battle going on where 4 BC were won on that morning. That was the day where that Piper Findlater had been shot through both ankles and he propped himself up and he played his regiment into the attack. So this was what was, there is this 4th battalions were all in that operation. Mine, the 2nd, was in the Khyber Pass and the Malakal Field Force. So we were all operating in that area, but that was, a very young sort of operation for us. First World War was really the one that really put us in our place. We had first division that was mustered out from India was the 3rd Lahore Division, and there were 3 brigades. The 1st brigade was halted in Aden and sent on to Gallipoli. And the other 2 brigades landed in Marseille in October. And by that time, the BEF, which had been fighting rearguard action right from the Marne downwards, had been in action for 60 days, without reinforcements, without food, without running short of ammunition. And they had come into this line, the East line, which was about a 400-mile line right up to the Channel. And it was here that we, what delayed us getting into action was that the Indian Army had a different rifle to the one that was being used in the field there. So it took a little time to convert. Ammunition was different and it took a little time to convert. But anyway, by the 7th of November, we were put into the field, not as a battalion, as a platoon here, a company here, to fill the gaps where the British forces had lost their men. And my colonel wrote in the war diary, if you read through it, that I don't know where my battalion is. The platoon here, the section there, the company here, and something else there. So that was how the first action took place. Then, of course, when reinforcement started, the battalion came together. We had our brigade, the Jalandhar brigade, was the first brigade to go into action. And we had 46th, 76th, which is now the 5th, 6th, and mine, the 15th, 6th, which is now the 2nd. And then it had the 129 Baluchis, and it had the 1st Manchesters. So it was four battalion brigade. And then they fought. Now the 5th has a very interesting reputation. Our minimum height was, for the Sikh regiment, was 5'7". And then these Sikhs who were below 5'7" petitioned the government that we are the same material, we have the same heart, and we are just shorter than the others, so why can't we be formed into a battalion? And that was in 1901, the first 5th, 6th took birth, and they were all little fellows. But their performance in the first battle of Ypres and the second battle of Ypres was brilliant. They took very heavy casualties, they fought like anything, and there's a story which goes around that they attacked when they should have not been attacking. They occupied the German village, which was occupied by the Germans then, and they saw these little fellows chasing the Germans around with the bayonet. So it was a but they took very heavy casualties. We took, all of us took heavy casualties in that. But in Mesopotamia, where the 4th and the 3rd forts together, both battalions were wiped out. And they had to, in fact, even in Gallipoli, when the first 6, which were part of the brigade that was detached from the 3rd Lahore Division, was sent to Mesopotamia, they were sent 1,200 strong because they didn't have enough, they sent the reinforcements along with them so that they couldn't back up later on. And they took 1,400 casualties. It's more than their strength. So that was, and there were no officers left. In fact, the last officer they had was the 2nd Lieutenant Severi, who later became Adjutant General of India, and Regiment Severi, and he's colonel of our regiment also. And he was also on the last day wounded. So then they had to, it was very Subramania area and some other officers were put there. Then they had to lift 2 double companies of 1st Battalion, which were now 15 Punjab. They were on the Suez. And they lifted 2, they had a double company system then, they lifted 2 to come and reinforce this battalion. Another reinforcement coming from India, the ship was sunk, so the entire lot were drowned. So it was a very heavy casualty. It was not only with us, British regiments were wiped out. It was a very different thing. But it took time for the Indian soldier to really adjust himself to was artillery shelling. That is something which we had never been. We'd been on the giving end, not on the receiving end in the frontiers and all that area. And we had never been under fire. And then suddenly to get the mediums and the heavies open up on our troops, it took them. They were shaky initially, but they settled in very fast. And we never had any desertions. And things went very well. In fact, it was our brigade that won the first Indian VC. Because the Indian VC was only started in 1911, 2 officers. Before that, it was the IOM only. And it was not our, one of our battalions was the 129 Baluchis, Khudada Khan, which is down in Pakistan. They got the Victoria Cross, he got a Victoria Cross there. And my regiment, in the 2nd Battle of Eek, we won our second Victoria Cross there. In fact, the General and I, this is a few years ago, on the 100th year of the war when it started, we went to France and to Belgium, and we spent a good fortnight trudging along those routes where our regiments took. We had a battlefield historian and we had the maps and we had the war diary copies and all, and wherever the battalion went, we followed it. And very interesting to see. And we went up to the place where the 2nd Lieutenant Smythe, one is VC. It was a little high ground. And so Mao, I was looking, because he had gone through one of those drainage ditches which they built there to get rid of shallow areas in the fields. And the bombing party had to go up that. So the general went ahead of me, and I was all geared up to finding the trenches there and finding something there in that high ground. And I said, Mao, did you see anything there? He said, yes. I said, what do you see? He said, I see a lot of ducks here. Because somebody there, the miners had gone underneath and blown up that area, and some enterprising farmer made it into a duck pond later on. But that was where we won our Victoria Cross. So that was happening all over. But it was, when you read through, and then you see those hundreds and hundreds of cemeteries. And I went to the cemetery where there was a young doctor who had won a bar to his VC. And we both paid our respects at that place. And then we went around looking at all the, at Mining Gate, New Shepherd, at all the places. They brought back memories. We went to his regiment, to Delville, where his regiment had attacked Delville Wood. And there was a British regiment attacking High Wood on our right. And we went to their forming up spot. And then as we walked up to where the wood started, one would think, it's strange that a cavalry charged into a wood, but there was no wood there in those days. The guns had flattened everything. There were no trees standing, there were stumps all over the place. But when we were walking along, we suddenly found a piece of shrapnel from 1916. So he's got that as a souvenir, which had been fired on his regiment. But it just shows the type of casualties on the Somme, for instance. 1 million people died on the first day. 600 Arad and 400 Axis. At Verdun, the same thing happened. So those are sort of figures that, mind-boggling figures. But that was the type of warfare then, and our regiments went through it very creditably. Both the 3rd Lahore Division and the 7th Garhwal Division and our 2 cavalry corps that went there performed brilliantly. Gardner's horse at you got a Victoria Cross. Govind Singh got on top DC there. So there were a lot of people who'd never seen this sort of cone or the type of terrain. And I remember reading through one war diary in which one of the Gurkha's regiments, in the morning when the officer went to relieve, the men were on sentry duty. It was freezing cold. Incidentally, we had gone into that November war within our summer uniforms. We had nothing to wear. Then when they came into the homes where they were billeted with French people, it was a French woman there, the lady of the house, who either gave a tablecloth, took off a curtain or took off something else, gave it to the men to put on. And one adjutant recalled, he said it was strange to see my regiment fallen in, some with pink clothes on and some with red and some with yellow and green, because they were all curtains and other things. I don't like very much what I'm saying, but I'm making a noise. But anyway, this was the way that war was fought. Then we went to Turkey, and I went to Gallipoli, and I went to follow again some of the various battles, whether it was at Tennis, where General Hamilton brought his force in, or at Anzac Cove, or at Suvla Bay, or where the New Zealanders were in defense, throwing handmade bombs at the Turks the other side, or where the Gurkhas were blown off the hill. That's where actually Field Marshal Slim took the decision to join the Gurkhas. Because he saw them go into that Gurkha hill, and the defense and the attack they put in, the aggressiveness they showed, and the capturing of that hill. Later on, of course, they were blown off the hill by naval fire. That was a mistake which took place. But the courage of those men made him volunteer, and he eventually served the first service. So these are interesting stories. It is a different period, but it shows the courage of the man. It shows the courage of our soldiers. Nobody deserted. Everybody stood there, ground, and the regiments fought as they were ordered to fight, whether it was the First World War, whether it was in France, whether it was later on in Gallipoli, or in the Second World War in the North African desert or everything. We did a great job, and I think we are very proud of our army and our soldiers who fought.
That's a very comprehensive account, sir, and thank you very much. And I must say that our army, your regiment in particular, has kept up that tradition even after independence. Where we've got 2 Paramveer Chakras to your regiment, and there are 1 or 2 more that could have been given had the citation been written correctly. But that's another story on how awards are given. But I'd like to ask General Shege, you were with the Chief Minister in all those battlefields. Your regiment has also earned the Victoria Cross, if I remember correctly. What is it that crossed your mind? Because you went there having experienced tank warfare on the Indian front, and those battlefields in Europe were initially the place from Somme onwards where tank warfare was initiated. Some would argue that Little Hart's writings were picked up by the Germans faster than the British. Some would argue that the British actually initiated the whole concept of tank warfare. What is it that struck you? Because the Indian soldier there, apart from initially being part of horse-mounted cavalry charges, and there's a case, I don't remember which regiment, but there was this Dafadar who went up and down the front line and his regimental headquarters 3 or 4 times under fire carrying messages till he got a Victoria Cross and carried on doing that. What is it that we brought home from those wars as lessons to be implemented in India? I'm on the India-Pak front where largely tanks have been used.
Well, you see, if you go back to the First World War, and when we talk about the cavalry, and I must say, cavalry alone, it's not enough in battle. Unless the infantry and the cavalry are welded together, integrated, you're not going to win any battle. On the Somme, the 1st Brigade Cavalry Charge was carried out by the Sikandrabad Brigade, and that was composed of the 29th Deccan Horse, the 4th, 7th Royal Dragoon Guards. I'm wearing their tie because we are affiliated to them. And the Pune Horse. And the Royal Dragoon Guards had to go towards Highwood and Deccan Horse towards Delville Wood. In many ways, it was going to be different because you were faced by machine guns and, of course, and the distance that you had to cover was at least half as longer than the charge of the Light Brigade. But both these regiments that carried out the charge did not have a tendency to report it. And so there was no poem, but they carried out the charge. A number of horses were killed and some lives lost, but they did their bit. And the result was, which should have been known earlier, that the time of the cavalry in close country against machine guns and artillery was over. And after 1917, the cavalry regiments were shifted to Palestine, and that is where another Victoria Cross was won by this regiment, again at a charge, where 2 squadrons charged, and Badlul Singh, Risaida Badlul Singh, he was awarded the VC while he was still living, but he was mortally wounded and later died. We had a strange recap of this many years later. I was adjutant of my regiment, and a retired JSO, a junior commissioned officer, turned up to attend our regimental day, which is the Jordan Valley Day, named after this VC that we'd won. And he was wearing desert mounted kit. He was wearing jodhpurs, he was wearing a khaki jacket, and he had chainmail on his shoulders, and he had 2 stars of Risunda. So we decided that we must give him an opportunity to speak at our darbar. And not many people get a chance to actually speak at a regimental darbar, apart from the colonel of the regiment, the commandant, and the Risunda major. So here he was put up onto the stage, and he went on to say that it was a great day, and Badlul Singh was mounted on a horse that had a very hard mouth. And when the bugle blew for the charge, the horse took off and never looked back. It took us precisely 5 seconds in getting hold of him and putting him off the podium. because that's not the way it actually happened. And this gentleman was the head clerk of the regiment and had nothing to do with what was happening on the front. That being said, it was a strange equation for Indian soldiers to be led by British officers. And during the Second World War, it became even because of the losses that had occurred amongst the English ranks. The officer cadre was thinly spread. And to the effect that many of the country-born Britishers were looked upon to fill the ranks of British regiments. And I remember I was told this by Major Lewis King, who used to live in Missouri. And so some of them, these young fellows, that got together, put through the officer training academy, and then sent to British regiments, where they were promptly refused. And so the government didn't know what to do with these officers, and eventually merged them into a liaison corps. However, during the battles, particularly in Burma, there were units who had lost all their officers, but it's the junior commissioned officers and the NCOs who continued fighting and leading their companies and platoons into battle. I think there was a great meeting between the British and the Indians, and particularly in Burma. We have to remember that we had Field Marshal Slim, who we consider an Indian general, because after all, he was from the Indian Army, but he was British. And at the same time, during this forgotten campaign, the Burma campaign, 62% of the entire force were Indians. And it is they who eventually turned tables and won against the Japanese. The Japanese, who were amazingly good fighters, specifically in defense. What else did we learn? Like I mentioned to you, that we were in our caste squadrons, within battalions, you had different. But the great thing that we took away from that was, everybody went to the Mandir parade, everybody went to the Gurudwara parade, everybody went to the parade at the mosque. We were all one. And that's the great message that we received from these wars. We were one.
It's very well put, sir. I think that's a tradition that's still followed. Though I'm reminded of a small anecdote from Sindh Horse, where the founder of Sindh Horse, Brigadier James Jacob, after whom Jacobabad is named in Pakistan, he commanded the regiment for 26 years without a day off. And when his Rasaldar Major went to ask him for a day off so that the men could go to Mandir and Gurdwara, he said, R.M. Sahab, I am not commanding a band of fakirs. Get on with soldiering. So eventually we evolved into doing the things that you are talking about. But let me ask Brigadier Gavin, since we are in the flow, and I'll come to this theme in the end, we are in the flow of tank warfare and issues that are lessons that we've learned. What is it that you would say still connects us, India and Britain, as two armies? We have our regimental connects. Many of our regiments, as Jen Shekhar has brought out, still have regimental ties, and this is both ties in relationship and the tie he is wearing. But what is it that the British Army, tank regiments there, would consider a given when you engage with Indian Army and Indian troops?
So I would centre the answer to that around this idea of why are our two armies so courageous? Because I think courage is one of the big themes of this panel today, and I think with one of the unifying bonds that gives us a huge mutual respect for each other's soldiers and each other's leaders. We both have armies and armed forces blessed with people with incredible fighting spirit, and there's a common history that we share. But the UK is a land that has of invasion. It has been immersed by different cultures who've all sent their martial young to come and take our territory, be it Anglo-Saxons, be it Normans, be it Vikings, and therefore we have been left with an incredible martial spirit inside our country. I think we share that with North India. I think North India too has had its fair share of invasions, but the people that come to do that are all the hardened, sinewy martial types, and some of the great martial races of North India, sit in the north, partly as a byproduct, I think, of invasion. So I think we share a common pedigree of deeply courageous and martial people from which we are drawn. I think we share a view of leadership which is demanding of sacrifice. It isn't a type of leadership that is demanding of individual gratification. It's one that glorifies those that are prepared to give more than they take out of their leadership role. The saying, horses, men, self, is the order in which we judge the best of our officers. So I think we have a leadership culture that is common and that binds us together in a deep and meaningful way. And I think also we have, in order to lead, you have to have, and we've both built our armed forces around units and formations with regional, ethnic, or social connections that bind the soldiers together in a way that to let their brother soldier down would be the thing that they would like to do least in this mortal world, and they would be prepared to sacrifice their life rather than let their brother down. So I think we share a martial spirit, we share a sense of leadership based on sacrifice, and we share a sense of those that are led willing to fight and give their life for their brother soldier. That's where I think the connection is.
I think we all share that sentiment. That's very well put. Dividir Harvey, you just spoke at Center for Land Warfare Studies in Delhi and kind of spelled out a futuristic view, a strategic view on where you think warfare is headed. Now, one of my worries about the martial spirit of people is that modern warfare, sadly, is, in one context at least, demanding less and less of it. I mean, if you look at President Obama's drone-centric foreign policy, you saw drones being rained on people who were some of the bravest men on earth. People in the AFPAC region, the frontier men of Pakistan, the people in Afghanistan, and often they didn't know where the drones were coming on. As Churchill once said, that when you meet the Pathan at the Khyber, he shakes you by the hand with a look in the eye that you might be the King Emperor or the Viceroy of India, but I am as much a man as you are. I would say that for the Sikhs also. Where is modern warfare headed in terms of using that kind of spirit, that kind of fighting tradition, and how can that be brought into play? Can a man sitting behind a computer screen firing a drone be required to have the same level of enthusiasm as he would have if his company commander told him, get off the bloody trench, as they did in World War I, and show them your cap badges?
That is indeed a very difficult question. It is one of the problems that is exercising us in strategy at the moment, is how we be equipped for a warfighting division, while also being able to conduct smaller size operations such as Iraq, Afghanistan, in a context where we are experiencing constant competition, as you describe, those activities below the threshold of war, and competing and overcoming terrorism and extremism. We can learn a lot of lessons from the past, as we've been doing during this festival, but we must also constantly educate ourselves to remain relevant, so that we both have armed forces that are equipped for the future. Now, we cannot tell whether we will need those warfighting divisions or those modern technologies that you describe, and therefore we must be equipped for both. But as we experience different operations, what we can do is learn from each other. So India has been experiencing more operations of scale and requiring a different type of readiness to that which we experience in Britain. And so we are currently conducting a review of readiness, and I believe that we could probably learn a lot from the Indian Army to help us with that. Likewise, in Britain, we are putting a huge amount of effort in organisations such as 77 Brigade, where we look at the modern technologies to counter some of the very different types of warfare. And we must also ensure that we attract the very best talent in our forces. And they may well be people who look very different to our warriors from the past. They may not have the same muscles in their bodies, but the courage of their minds must be the same. And we will draw that talent from all sectors of society, which is again another reason why we must understand people from different cultures and faiths, so that we attract the very best talent into our armed forces. We can learn so much from each other, even at a lower level, from, for example, medical treatments. As technology advances, you may experience different types of injury that we have not yet experienced, and we owe it to our soldiers to make sure that they have the very best of treatment from wounds on the battlefield. And there's one example of how we can learn from each other. We must constantly think that modern warfare covers all domains. We must not fall into the trap of believing that it is just cyber, just drones. We must be prepared for every circumstance, and to do that, we must work with our partners. We have great partnerships with India on technology and on cyber. We must exercise those partnerships as well as learning from each other on the battlefield to ensure that we are equipped for warfare in the future.
Thank you. Again, a very comprehensive answer. Captain Sohail, your units that you are putting together with Sikh connections, are you drawing on Sikh martial tradition to the extent that new raising Sikh units or Punjab regiment units of the Indian Army do? What are the kind of mottos you are adopting? What are the kind of linkages do you encourage your units to have with Sikh units in the Indian Army, or are you planning to have those linkages? Because there is a shared heritage that you plan to revive.
Thank you. Can I answer that question by just touching upon what Mom said earlier? So with modern warfare, we're seeing ourselves more involved within the information domain and information warfare in particular. And from my Sikhi roots, what I would pull out is the need not just to be active and involved within the virtual domain, but also the cognitive domain. And I say Sikhi roots because my name, Jay, is actually Jagajit. And I often draw inspiration from Manjit there, Jagajit. By controlling your mind, you can champion the world. And that is what the cognitive domain is all about. It's about getting into this environment where we can understand information flow, understand target audience sets, and apply the necessary effect, the objective. Turning to your question more directly, in a nutshell, yes, we heard from the Brigadier earlier that whenever an officer of whatever background, faith, and even nationality comes through the Indian Army Memorial Room at Sandhurst, that they get a deep understanding of the Indian Army and the connection that we have in Britain to that history. In specific terms, we have since 2013 commemorated Saragari Day in the UK as well, and you'll all be very familiar with the commemoration here in India, but this was something that post-47 wasn't marked in the UK, but we've brought it back with a view of deepening those relationships between Britain and India, and also exploring those relationships within specific units. So I'm always amazed with the history that I encounter, even within regiments when I visit officers' messes up and down the country, of the linkages back. And part and parcel of the task I've taken upon myself within uniform is to encourage more officers of all levels to be confident in exploring those linkages and seeing where they may materialise. So it could very well be within the cognitive knowledge-based domain, understanding from past battles, but also practically visitations like we have this year, but also last year as well when we brought the Army Engagement Group to this very festival. And let me end by saying, when we look at those linkages and the importance of Sikh martial tradition, it is inspirational, it is quite moving, and it's a testament to the modern British Army that we not only explore that, but we are actually going abroad and battlefield studies, as we heard earlier, often do take place within the Western Front setting. The one visit, one overseas tour that I did with 77 Brigade in 2016 was to Burma itself, and seeing where the Chindits fought for the very first time, possibly for the very first time since the Second World War, going as far up as close to the Chinese border in a place called Myitkyina, where Tun Bahadur Gun earned his Victoria Cross. This was a Gurkha, and I got to read out that citation at that very location. So that deeper understanding we get from our shared history certainly brings out those shared values, and I feel quite proud of being one of many that provide that living bridge between Britain and India.
Wonderful, wonderful. And Mr. Wheeler, as a historian of tank warfare, where do you see future tank battles taking place? As Little Heart said, if you want peace, then understand war. But having understood war, where do you see the usage of tanks, particularly in the light of the fact that more and more conflicts, since World War II have veered towards the low intensity type. And yes, we did see tanks being used between India and Pakistan in 1965 and 71 wars. We did see 67 and 70. We did see the first
really interesting question. I think if we look to recent history, we've seen obviously tanks being used in the Ukraine with Russian-backed insurgents having tank support there. We've also seen being used in Afghanistan, again in a fire support role. I think that if you're looking for future warfare, you're looking for countries that maybe have a large land border. Because as we've seen with the French in World War II, if you develop a defensive system like the Maginot Line, and you put your trust in that, then it can be overcome by planning and surprise and other tactics. So I think you need to think about where you've got vulnerable areas, where there are gaps, where you can deploy armour and exploit armour, and look at it in that way. Again, we've seen time and time again people say the death of the tank. But if you look at the battlefield, I mean, out in Iraq, they had the Warrior infantry fighting vehicles. They were coming under fire, RPGs coming towards them, etc. The best thing to send out to support them was a Challenger 2. That then took the fire. It was more capable of defending itself and could respond. So you can use it in smaller actions. If you look at the Canadians back in the early 2000s as well, they actually made the decision to get rid of their tanks. They then did a 180-degree reverse when they went to Afghanistan. They realised that they needed that tank support and they couldn't do without it. So I think it's going to be something you're going to require in your inventory going forward. Where you can deploy it will really depend on your capabilities, your lift capabilities, and basically how quickly you can move it. I don't think we're going to see the large build-ups that we saw in the Cold War of large formations again. There's going to be movability and strategic movability that you can do with armed forces, and that's where I'd see it going forward. And also look to the nations who are developing new tanks. If they're developing new tanks, they're probably the ones who are more likely to use them. I hope that's answered.
Right. May I now request the Honourable Chief Minister, sir, for the final word on during the two wars and the history of British military presence in India, how it has influenced our current day regimental bondings, how it has influenced our traditions, and above all, how it has influenced the way our units are made up and how they are motivated to fight.
I think we all know our Indian Army, as it's where its genesis goes from. We've started, of course, there may have been little units in different parts of this. Is that better? All our traditions go back ever since Indian Army came into existence. From the Madras Presidency, then the Bombay Presidency, then the Calcutta Presidency, and all. It's been hundreds of years, and I think our oldest regiment is 300 and something. I think it would be the Madras. The 3rd Punjabis were also there, which went to Pakistan, but we've also got a 3rd Punjab. They were probably the oldest. Coastal sepoys they were raised as. But they were all based on the British system which had evolved at that time. And subsequently, whether they were infantry, cavalry, artillery, or whichever supplies or signals or something, it was based on a system which evolved from the British system. And that is the way it's been. All our regimental traditions are based on that. And whether anyone likes it or not, that is the way it's been for hundreds of years. And you may have a different sort of outlook to life today in the political field, but that doesn't change the system that exists in the defense services. We keep a very close tab with our officers of our regiments who have retired in 1947 and gone back to Britain. Unfortunately, there used to be annual day and most of us used to go to join them in London. But now, so many years have passed, there's nobody left. But happily, the second and third generation are also keeping things going. Now, I'll tell you a story. In it was 15, there was a young officer, it was in the second battle, in the first battle of 14, that he was wounded in the field. He was Lieutenant Henderson. And his Subedar, Subedar Manta Singh, who was the senior JC of that company, dragged him into a gardener's hut in one of the French villages, and while this battle was going on. And at night, he took the Frenchman's wheelbarrow, put this young officer in it, and wheeled him back to safety. And he survived. He later commanded our battalion, and then he was colonel of the center also at Nashera at that time. And it was he who was commanding when his son Robert Henderson and my father joined on the same day, the battalion. And then, of course, Robert, who we all loved and knew very well, he passed away. But his son carries on that tradition, and both Manta Singh's son and Robert's son are the greatest of friends, and their children are the greatest of friends. And once a year, when the day comes, they all get together. So it's a tradition that is going on, and if it's with my battalion, I'm sure it's with so many other battalions too, which is happening. So these traditions you cannot kill. We have stories that go back, we have traditions that just evolve, and that is something that must continue. So our association with the British Army is a very close association. And as the Brigadier said, we can certainly cooperate. I hope that our government also looks at it that way. Cooperate in the form. We have a whole command which is the Army Training Command, and it's also for evolving future plans. And so can they. So why don't we work together? Because I don't see us in any way not having a warm relationship over the years that are going to come. So I hope this happens, and that we work together in the future too, and that both our armies work closely together, and not only that, that they continue, and when the chips are down, maybe someday we'll fight shoulder to shoulder again, and that's what we are all waiting for. We are soldiers, and that's our job. And if we can fight with those who we fought with for years and years, it would be something that is would be. But now I think one last question I would like to put to this panel, particularly from Britain. You know, Afghanistan is a contentious issue. Now we've had the first Afghan war. We've had the second first Afghan war where nobody came out but a dog and his doctor. We've had the second Afghan war. We've had the third Afghan war. We know what the Afghans are like. Even Maharaja Ranjit Singh never went into the mountains. He drew them down from the mountains and fought them in the plains. Why have you gone and got stuck in Afghanistan again? That's what I want to ask you. You have this. You have this whole experience, you have this history, you've seen what happened. Afghans are different people. If they can't fight you, they'll fight themselves. So they love fighting. And I don't think it was the right thing for Britain to really get stuck for the fourth Afghan war into those mountains again. So I think that Brigadier would probably.
Well, it's another question that's very difficult to answer. So, whether the military situation on the ground or not is where we'd like it to be right now, still the decision that was taken that Afghanistan, an unstable Afghanistan, was a threat to countries in the free world, I think is still a valid deduction, even now. And I think that decision, or that question at the time, demanded a response. And we, as soldiers, the best we can do is go and try and contain a security situation in the best way that we possibly can, in compliance with the wishes of our collective governments, in order that the development of the human capital and the economy and the social situation can happen. And I think maybe in hindsight we were very ambitious in our assumption that that development could happen very quickly. And the ability to hold the security line, hold the security long enough, and to develop the capability of the Afghan government quickly enough so that we could leave that security function to the Afghan government. These are lessons that we learn in hindsight. But I think none of that in any way suggests that those countries that are involved in Afghanistan now are in any way leaving. We are watching and overwatching from a position where we hope the Afghan peace process comes up with a solution that is acceptable to the Afghan people. That's very important to us. We haven't set conditionality on time on our redeployment from Afghanistan. We've set conditionality on the right conditions being in place. And it's not, and I think it's still the right deduction that countries of the free world who enjoy a very privileged existence do choose to expend their capital in order to bring better conditions to those who don't enjoy them, and to protect the populations at home whom those governments are charged to protect.
Thank you very much, Brigadier. I think that's a good defense of your involvement in Afghanistan, though I go with the Honorable Chief Minister's view. I don't want to get into an extended debate in Afghanistan, but I think we are wise to learn from your lessons and stay away from the quagmire that is Afghanistan. On that note, I wish to thank all the panelists for their valuable contribution, especially so the Honorable Chief Minister, who's thrown considerable light on the various historical dimensions that made up India's relationship with Britain in the wars, and how we still carry forward that tradition, as I was discussing with the British team before the start of this session. Even shared bank accounts with some regiments, and sending back prisoners after the war as guests of the regiment because of an old tradition. But more of that in some of the other books and writings. Thank you very much for being with us, and I think the audience has had a full dose. I'm sorry, I got the warning bugle from the organizers to say no questions and answers, but I believe there are some gifts and mementos and books to be given. Thank you very much, sir.
We'll now request the Honorable Chief Minister to honor our guests on stage with the book.